welcome to our webinar today about juggling paradoxes. And now I would like to introduce you to our two speakers today. So first of all, we have Massimo Garbuio. He's our CEMS program director and associate professor in entrepreneurship at the University of Sydney Business School. And as a seasoned researcher, startup advisor, and strategy consultant, he has lent his expertise to taking companies in Australia from finance to FMCG and healthcare closer to the forefront of their industries. Then we also have Samuel Loher. He has worked as a strategy consultant for more than 5 years and is currently active in a strategic role for a global industrial company located in Zurich, Switzerland. He would describe himself as a strategy nerd driven to find more effective ways to strategize. And also I would like to add that he's a CEMS alumni from St. Gallen and CBS. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very excited for your presentation. Now I just have a few housekeeping rules. So please note that you're muted upon arrival. If you have questions, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and there you can ask questions. And even if you're not asking questions, you can still upvote questions if you find them relevant. Okay, so now I'm gonna let Massimo and Samuel begin with their presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline.
All right. Can you see my screen? Does that work?
Yeah, all good, except you need to move over to the slides is all.
Perfect. Yeah. So thank you, Caroline, and hello, everybody. I'm excited to have you all here and to spend the next hour with Massimo and all of you talking about the paradoxes of modern strategy. Like many people in this webinar, I've been sitting in strategic management courses in my studies. It has always been intriguing and fascinating to me, and it was always humbling to hear the case studies of Procter & Gamble, Nokia, Apple, and Coca-Cola. Strategy seemed to be the craft of a bunch of very smart managers, like you can see here on the screen, equipped with the insights about the world from deep analysis and expertise. The strategists in these stories made smart and bold decisions up front. And it seemed that in hindsight, they have just put their money on the right horse to beat competition. They used numerous analytical tools like Porter's 5 forces, SWOT analysis, PESTLE, and whatnot. And it just suggested that if you only analyze enough of the market, the competitors, the company, the customers, a successful strategy will evolve and can be written down in a PowerPoint deck, and this will do all the magic trick. But I've always wondered, is strategy really this linear? Is the secret really making the right choices and formulating the right plan up front? What about inherent uncertainties in the market? The risks behind your strategic plan, and these risks that are out of your control, like turbulences, shocks, disruptions. This inherent uncertainty when strategizing is something I've been curious about for many years now. And I found that most industries and companies have been facing substantial uncertainty in the past. And this phenomenon is increasing with numerous disruptive developments that are ongoing. So most companies find themselves in a reality that is very well described in a blunt way by Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. Mike Tyson knows from boxing that he cannot plan for the reality that much, no matter how much he analyzes beforehand. The level of uncertainty he's facing in the ring is high, and there are numerous outcomes possible at any moment. So does this story of Mike Tyson apply to business? Well, just look at what is happening to the automotive industry, for example, in which I work now since 3.5 years. While for quite some years, the direction and the growth vector that was always growing, was stable. We are now increasingly finding ourselves in a truly VUCA world. VUCA, right, is an acronym to say volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So trends like digitalization, alternative propulsion systems, autonomous driving, robo-taxis that completely change the behavior of car ownership, new players like Tesla, Apple, Uber, there's just no longer one clear future that we can focus on and build our strategy on. We have found a great conceptualization of uncertainty in business. And this conceptualization comes from Hugh Courtney in his book, 2024 Sight. And yes, you see correct, 2001. This concept is 20 years old, but it has been relevant ever since. And an external shock like the COVID pandemic simply made this reality so clear that even the last ones are starting to get it. So what does this concept say, right? We see 4 levels, 4 realities that a business can find themselves in based on the uncertainty they're facing. On the left-hand side, you see a clear enough future. You can see the world as it is. There are no uncertainties around, and you can plan, and your plan is likely to succeed, A to B. If you move further to the right, a bit more uncertainty around, you might see a set of limited alternate futures. It's either A or B, or maybe C. So what can you do here? You can do scenario planning, and you're pretty good to go, right? But if you move more towards uncertainty, you're facing a range of possible outcomes, right? And if you go all to the right, this is the other extreme, true ambiguity. There's no indication what will happen next. So we believe that most companies find themselves rather in a world where you have a range of futures, a range of outcomes, what will happen next. And this world requires a different approach to strategy than the traditional formulating a plan and going executing this just straight away. These approaches should be more agile, rather building on evolution principles, finding the best way to your goal, and embracing uncertainty rather than eliminating it from the start. And really aiming at navigating this range of possible outcomes in the most effective way possible. That's what we're gonna look at. So, Massimo, over to you about the paradoxes.
Thank you, Samuel. Predicting the future is in fact not really easy. And we have so many tools and frameworks like Samuel mentioned that can help us understand the world we live in and then making a choice and changing those choices along the way if we need to. But where do the best strategies come from? Is there a formula, step-by-step approach that you should follow, or is that something else that you should consider? If we think about master strategists, they really understand that they have to keep in mind some paradoxes. And here we have some examples. Do the best strategies emerge from an analytical approach, a scientific approach, or a creative approach? Do they emerge from the top management team, from the CEO and the board, or do they come up from the bottom line, from the people in the shop front? Are the best strategy coming out of a strategy formulation process, or do they emerge during implementation? Do they come out of a periodical process, the once-a-year strategy retreat, or are the best strategies coming out of continuous strategizing? Let's take a quick poll and see what you all think are the paradoxes that you're struggling most when you're thinking about strategy and you're strategizing. So most of you do struggle mostly with formulation versus implementation. Do the best strategy emerge during the step-by-step of a strategy formulation process, or do they emerge during implementation? That's a really interesting question that we are trying to uncover today during this webinar. Let me start by sharing with you something. Often when we think about strategy, we compare strategy with chess. And in reality, this is a trap. We believe that the purpose of strategy is to systematically analyzing industries, competitive positions, then develop some strategic options, judge the probabilities of success, and then choose a competitive position for the firm. Write that in a really nice PowerPoint deck, often a few hundred pages, and then share with the rest of the company. Those are all the analytical tasks, and that's why we think strategy and chess are very similar. They're both about identifying competitive moves, thinking one step ahead what the other person on the competition is doing, and then implement the plan for victory. But there are also some fundamental differences between strategy and chess. Chess is about studying the board, recognizing patterns and lines of plays. If you're a master chess player, you will have in your head pretty much the entire board game. Choosing a move for chess is intellectually complex. There is a lot to keep in mind, but it's behaviorally very, very easy. You move the piece on the board and you're done. Implementation is straightforward. There is not much that can come against you. In strategy, implementation and thinking never falls apart. In business, though, strategy is a very different beast, and the thinking and the doing part present some really big challenges. You really have to consider execution when you are doing strategic thinking. Why? Strategy has multiple goals. It's not just about winning. You have multiple goals that you need to keep in mind. Is that about increasing market share? Is that about entering a new market? Is that ROI? Is that some other measure of performance? Is that social responsibility? Is that sustainability measures? There are also multiple ways that you can use to achieve a goal in strategy. There are different resources that you can mobilize inside your company. And there are different ways to grow: M&A, organic growth, partnerships, and so on. And importantly, when you are implementing your strategy, there is lots that come into your way. You're interacting with people, you're interacting with companies, the technology is going to change, the preferences of your customers are going to change, your customers that you're targeting are going to change, and you can't really forecast all of these. And that's why in strategy, even if you become a fantastic strategic thinker, there is always the execution that needs to be taken into consideration. And so you can't really compare strategy and chess. And that's when that thick PowerPoint deck with a strategy that you have developed once a year or once every 3 years is not really going to help you that much. And the execution is going to present some opportunities for innovation that you probably didn't foresee. So it's not just against you, execution is also very much in your favor. So let's have a look at the 4 paradoxes that we have included in the poll tonight. And the first one is analytical versus creative. Strategy is really both about analysis and imagination, science and art. You don't really want to fall victim of the chess syndrome or the chess trap. That you don't want to fall victim of the belief that strategy is only about analyzing and then someone will implement or implementation will happen in some way. You want to be analytical when you can predict the future with past data. Think about McDonald's, has been around for a long time. They have a lot of data. There are many processes in place. They always prepare the same kind of food. And you know what's competitive advantage in that industry. You know how to behave in that industry. You fundamentally can use all data, past data, to make prediction about the future. You know what's going to happen. You also want to be scientific when you sense the environment, when you're monitoring trends about technologies, about consumer behaviors, trends about competitors and their moves. You want really to be able to cover everything there. You don't want to be selective because you never know who is going to disrupt your industry. In one of my books, we interviewed someone that worked for Motorola and was designing new mobile phones. And the board and the top management team said, the next phone needs to be black. That's the color the customer wants. What was happening though is the customers and around the customers, every other product that was coming out at that time was either silver or was colorful. And so think about Nokia came out with some colorful phone. By the time that Motorola made the decision of another black phone and the time that the phone actually came out in the marketplace, customers were used to something completely different. And Motorola with a black phone in that specific instance wasn't really able to be successful. You also want to be analytic and scientific when you have designed your new strategy and you're going to create some pilots or are implementing some initiatives, because that's the time in which you want to really be scientific and use a step-by-step approach in identifying the customer, testing your assumption, and really understanding what's working, what's not working. Analysis, though, just gets you that far. You also need imagination in the way that you think about strategy and design strategy. In the VUCA world that Samuel was talking about before, competitive advantage is always changing. Think also about the hotel industry. You know how the hotel industry works, but you have to think that companies like bookings.com or Airbnb can emerge and can take a big chunk of your margins. So now the hotel industry is catching up and offering something similar or taking the business back from bookings.com, but it's way too late. Those companies are worth much more and they have a lot of customers that are happy with their offerings. So whenever there is the possibility for someone to be very nimble, a startup that can take part of your pie, that's when you really need to be imaginative. You need to be creative in the strategies that you're going to develop. The other situation in which creativity is really important is when you're trying to come up with new ideas about customer values. Think about Porter or the SWOT analysis. They really take the picture at one moment in time and they're looking at the status quo. They're looking at how things are today. And what it does, it basically anchor your thinking to that particular instance and that particular situation. And you will never be able to come up with innovative ideas if you start from that point. And that's when, design thinking or blue ocean strategies are really going to help you to think differently about what you can do for your customers. Finally, whenever you want to come up with an idea about a prototype that you want to test in the marketplace, that's when you really want to apply Elon Musk first principle thinking. Ask yourself, what should I do in the case I have no restriction, in the case I'm doing this starting from scratch? When you don't have the constraints of the existing resources and capabilities of your companies, that's when you can really think creatively about how to solve problems, how to come up with brand new business models. The second paradox that we saw in the poll, and this was not a struggle for many, but it's a really important part of the puzzle that I see over and over again when I talk with senior executives, but also especially with boards, is the top-down versus the bottom-up. Does a great strategy come out of the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musk, the board, or does the best strategy come out of the floor, the people that are just starting out, junior people in the organization, most of you in this case? The answer is, again, both. You need both, but you need to be a little bit careful in how you play them. So if you think about the CEO or the board, they have a lot of experience and they have what we call the helicopter view of the company and the marketplace. They're able to connect the dots. they also are connected with other boards in different industries. And this is really important because they see trends emerging and they can see different business models emerging at the same time. Strategy has also historically been the responsibility of the board and the CEO, which is going to set the risk appetite for the company. Yeah, we want to take risks, and therefore people at the bottom will be comfortable in experimenting and taking risks, or it's a more traditional company that doesn't really want to do that. The problem with the top-down approach in strategy is that the board and the C-level team is often a little bit too far away from the customers. For one of my studies, I interviewed a senior person in a telecommunication company in Europe a couple of years ago. And I remember that the CFO in that situation was making decisions about allocating resources to the different businesses, in particular to a TV business in that case. And he had never used the product that the company was making. He never used the product for which he was making a decision, a really important strategic decision. This is not really going to help understand the customers, the needs, the pain points, and what you can do for the customer. So if you're at the top, if you're a senior person, try to ask yourself, am I familiar enough with the product that the company sells? Am I familiar enough with the product that I'm going, or the strategy that I'm going to invest in? When we think about the bottom up, you know the customers. You know the customers really, really well, and you know the processes and the systems that are in place, and you know what is going to work and what is not going to work. You fundamentally know the roadblocks at the time of implementation. And also, you want to be involved. You need to be involved in the strategic conversation, because that's the only way that you can really buy into a new strategy. The reality and the problem with the strategies that are developed from the bottom up is that they're often a wish list of things that is good to do, but they're not really prioritized through a strategic lens. And also, often they're just too much about the roadblocks and the problems, rather than having that long-term view, that helicopter view that the top of the organization often has. So if you're a junior strategy, and if you're a strategist, and if you're starting out, ask yourself, am I constantly learning from the customers? Am I identifying their problems and developing some solution that have an impact for the strategy of the company? But also, am I seeing only roadblocks? Am I seeing only the negative sides of things, or am I also seeing the possibilities? If you ask your questions, you are seeing how you fit and your action fit with the company strategies and will have an impact in the company strategies. Let's have a look at the other two paradoxes that we have discussed in the pool. And the next one, formulation versus implementation, is the one that you are almost struggling with.
Perfect. Thank you, Massimo. So, paradox 3, formulation implementation. This often suggests that it's a highly sequential process, right? Where the magic is in formulating the right plan, which then, simple, only has to be executed, right? And we heard in the chest rep that's not that easy. Strategy is the feat of a few thinkers, executed by many doers. Let's just hope the doers are doing it correctly. Well, as we have heard with Massimo in these paradoxes, it's the power of and that we have here in the middle, right? It indicates that both is important, yes. But in our perspective, formulation and implementation move very closely together and go in sync, rather than having this very separated sequential process. In the strategic agility approach, this is the strategy approach I wrote a book about, and also at my current company, Analytical Group, where we work with this approach, we do have a few, but very clearly formulated, pre-formulated elements to our strategy, right? So these three, right? The purpose of a company. What makes a company relevant? What's its reason for existence? What's the why behind all of it? And this is very important, but we clearly separate it from a growth ambition that is clearly defined, quantified, and very important, shared among everybody in the company, understanding where are we heading, measurable, right? Typically, we track this in turnover in most companies, also at Oettinger. But an NGO, for example, could also measure its growth and impact with a different indicator, like trees planted or number of asylum seekers prevented from deportation. Finally, we outline the playing field. Where do we want to play? What are the most relevant issues and what are strategic guidelines to maneuver those issues? What is in scope? What is out of scope? So guided by this purpose, guided by the strategic ambition, and within this playing field, we have now the right setup for strategy. And now it's getting interesting, right? When we think of implementation. And we're having one big mantra in strategic agility that says, strategy is where you put your resources. Again, strategy is where you put your resources, no matter what your PowerPoint deck says. The strategy actually becomes alive once you start taking active steps towards your ambition, right? That's what the strategy is. And we say where you put your resources. Resources are typically invested in initiatives, which are the major vehicle for change and growth at companies. Initiatives are typically a cross-functional project with a highly strategic objective, moving the needle towards our ambition. So we have seen that in most businesses or most business realities, such initiatives face uncertainties, right? And that an upfront plan will quickly be rendered ineffective. Hence, these initiatives need to be managed in an agile way, allowing for dynamic decision-making on the way, seeking the initiative's best way towards the ambition. And as these decisions determine the path of the initiative, and as we said that these initiatives are the major vehicle for strategy, this activity of dynamic decision-making is actually strategizing in our understanding. Finally, in strategic agility and also at Oettinger, we go so far to say the portfolio of initiatives, so the sum of these strategic initiatives, is actually your strategy, your real strategy, right? This is where you put your resources. And this portfolio, we dynamically tweak and adjust it. It's like a portfolio of growth options, right? That will bring us closer and closer towards the ambition. And this evolutionary character is making the strategy robust in turbulent times and turbulent environments. Now let's see how this looks like, an example how this looks like, such a portfolio at a company like Oettinger. How do we drive our strategy? You see here the portfolio of initiatives, right? We have continuously a changing set of 10 to 15 initiatives where we commit resources. We differentiate between two types of initiatives. You see green and blue. You see the green ones, like this initiative A down there at the bottom, business development initiative in a certain segment, right? A new segment. These build initiatives actually fuel the growth towards our growth ambition. They're about developing the business through new products, segments, yes, in this case, new geographies, new materials or new services, right? Really new business that we add and stack to our turnover to reach our turnover target. On the other hand side, you have an initiative B, productivity improvement X. So these are runner initiatives for us, the blue ones. They're optimizing the existing business, making sure we're profitable there and we can further exploit business opportunities that we have been in for a while. And they're building the platforms for growth, right? Why are those two in the same portfolio, you might ask? Because very often, or most of the time, they require the same set of resources. We heard strategy is where you put your resources. And with resources, I mean, mainly the people actually driving forward. That's typically the bottleneck in the companies I've seen. Management attention, and then also financial resources. So this is what you can invest as a company and yes, it will probably flow into your biggest strategic initiatives, and you better map them here to understand what's happening, because in the end, strategy is very much about making trade-offs in resources. What are you doing, but also what are you not doing? That's why we don't believe in a pretty PowerPoint presentation, right? But actually that the real strategy becomes alive through the resource allocation, which happens through the initiatives. So where you invest your money, your best people, and your attention, what you're thinking about all day long as a top management member, this is most likely where your company will move towards, right? And we often say this portfolio is like an X-ray, right? You can look through it and, hey, show me your X-ray, and I can tell you where your company will be going and moving towards, because that's what's happening, not really what's written down, right? So let's look at a few more things that you can read out of this portfolio we work with, right? The X-axis, right? Timing. Do we invest in short, mid, and long-term horizons? You see here initiatives that we say contribute to current earnings. They're really mature and we are really exploiting them. Mature in 2 to 3 years or even further out. This new segment is a long shot, right? But we start mapping it and allocating resources accordingly. The other axis is familiarity. What are the uncertainties that we are facing, right? We talked about embracing uncertainties. Here it's ingrained in the way we look at these strategic initiatives. Do we have very high uncertainties? These could be internal, maybe we don't have the capabilities, or external uncertainties that Massimo talked about, right? Where we have developments in the market, turbulences, we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't understand the market good enough yet, and it's just unclear. And the idea is really to move up, learn as we progress, and really embrace this uncertainty, identify them, and start learning and testing towards familiarity that we can better exploit these opportunities. Something else we can see here is, hey, we want to manage these initiatives differently, because an initiative in the absolute uncertain environment, ready in 3 to 4 years, there we put a explore approach to the place. Very different, very dynamic, very fact and data driven, little experiments, small steps, very evolutionary, trying to reduce uncertainty, moving the initiative upwards. Up here, like our productivity improvement here, well, this one started off, as I remember, a bit further down. We weren't sure about the technology and such, but by now we have reduced all uncertainties. We're pretty familiar, we're pretty clear what has to happen. Here we are moving to the left, if you think of the 4 levels. And yes, we are exploiting this opportunity to best contribute to our business. And maybe a last thing here that I want to leave you with on this portfolio is, hey, we talk about evolutionary strategy. It wouldn't be an evolutionary approach if it wouldn't be possible to fail in here, right? That's what it's all about. So, of course, on the journey from uncertainty up, moving upwards to familiarity, on that quest, you're going to find out that there is no potential. You're going to find out we can't do it. We're going to find out the market has moved faster. So the phones are colorful now, and we don't have a black phone, but that really will beat the market. So really manage the portfolio actively and weed out, terminate unsuccessful initiatives. Because why? They're just clogging up the space. They're using resources. So if we can take off initiatives that don't manifest and better early and learn early, you make room for new ones. And you can make sure that this ever-changing 10 to 15 initiatives are your best stab at contributing to your ambition. Moving forward to the last paradox, and with these initiatives in the portfolio now back of our heads, periodical versus continuous. So periodical, right? It needs to be both again, right? But how do we work in strategic agility and at Utica with these initiatives, right? So there's a periodical set to it. Actually 6 to 7 times a year, like in each top management meeting, there's dedicated time to discuss progress and learnings in these initiatives. Because why? This is where the management attention is needed, because this is your strategy. We also look at the portfolio of initiatives, like we take a step back, we look at the whole thing about twice a year, just making sure, do we have to terminate initiatives? Do we have to put on new initiatives? Is it really bringing us towards the ambition? what is the uncertainty we're dealing with. And the growth ambition and the playing field, as you heard, this is typically something created for longer term in our approach, but we review it regularly just to understand, are there any issues coming up in the playing field that we have to be aware of. So knowing this periodical way that the top management is working, the magic in my mind is still very much in the continuous work and implementation. And here it's all about empowering these initiative teams. I mean, there are teams behind all of these initiatives working. And at Analytical, we gave them business results, we gave them sponsors from top management, we gave them everything they need to be effective and move forward as fast as they can. And we also stress a lot managing with the right approach, right? Clarity is about uncertainties, and having the right methodology actually allows them, these teams, to be autonomous and actually do their decision making and strategizing within the initiative very much autonomously. Both the empowerment and having the right approach finally increases speed and quality of decision making a lot, and it allows for pretty speedy exploration of growth options. These were the 4 paradoxes that we wanted to share with you. And Massimo, maybe you can conclude on our contribution here.
Thank you, Samuel. Let's share with you 3 insights on how to juggle uncertainties and paradoxes in strategies. First of all, don't try to fight uncertainty. Uncertainty is here to stay, it's going to increase, and events like COVID are going to come back at some point in time, and you want to be ready and be very proactive at identifying those sources of uncertainty and then be fast in the reaction time. Second, learning is a really powerful skill, and learning and adaptation are even more powerful. The world is really changing fast, and it's not just COVID that is fueling the digital transformation, but think about also technologies like AI and how pervasive they are. Those are going to question your entire strategy. If your strategy is written in a PowerPoint deck and revised every couple of years, that's not going to help you. You really need to try to close the gap between formulation and implementation, which was indeed one of the, it was the biggest paradox that you have identified in your poll tonight or this morning for many of you. So your strategy has the greater chance to really be effective despite uncertainty, only if you're able to learn and adapt constantly. Finally, don't see strategy as a point in time, as the strategy retreat, in a, seaside location, in a vineyard for the top management team. Strategy is a journey, is always evolving, and you really don't want to fall victim of the chess trap that we have been speaking about before. It's not chess, it's very different. And that implies both challenges in the execution, but also opportunities when you're executing strategy so that you can find innovative ideas along the way. These hopefully bring those 4 paradoxes that we've discussed tonight together. And we're now opening up the floor for questions that we see in the Q&A section.
So the first question was, who needs strategy? In large corporates, it is usually an ivory tower exercise. In small corporates, there's usually no time.
Perhaps I can start on this one. So Alain, I totally agree with you in the sense that this is a really interesting question. There is also, though, I want to say strategy is important for everyone, as we talked about during the top-down, bottom-up part. And it's probably particularly important for the more junior people in an organization. Why is that? There are a few studies now that have established that the people that progress in their career faster are the people that are good at strategic thinking. They're not the people good at just operational things, the ones that are doing things right, but they are the people actually that do the right things, in the sense that they see how their action and how they decide to operate on a day-to-day basis is actually having an impact in the company strategy. Are you going to make your boss look good in a way? Are you going to help your boss to advance his or her career? Because those people, above you will be even closest to strategy and closer to where the company is trying to get to. So yeah, it could be an ivory tower, and small companies, you don't have time, but also, as Samuel said before, you need to stop at some point and reflect how what you do is going to have an impact in the bigger picture of the company. Samuel.
Yeah. Thank you, Massimo. I would also share a few thoughts on that. So concretely, large corporates, it's happening in an ivory tower, you say, Alan. Well, no, maybe first, why do we need a strategy, right? I think we need a strategy to stay relevant as a company, right? So there is some sort of a DNA, some sort of a purpose, something behind why there's even an existence of this company. And I would hope that this is something useful that the company wants to move forward. So to stay relevant in a turbulent environment, I think we need a strategy, and we really need to maneuver carefully and proactively in order to stick around for the next 10 years, 20 years, and decades to come. Now, large companies, there, I think, happening in an ivory tower, you say, I think there it's very important that we link to the resource allocation in the company. So it's not just the board, the executive board that has crazy ideas in their retreat and they drink nice wine there, but rather, hey, how do we manage to link to what's happening, the initiatives that are actually happening, the X-ray we talked about, and matching it with their ideas and their ambitions, right? And I think having that link is very powerful to the implementation, to what's really happening when the resources are allocated. I think that's what you should strive for in a large corporation. And in the small companies, you say there's no time. Well, yes, I know that, but I think it's also because strategies looked at something big effort, 4 or 5 months, big strategy project, no money, no time to do that. And then, we're doing anything crazy anyway, and we're not listening to the PowerPoint deck. I think there, the goal is to make it something natural and not a big exercise, but something naturally ingrained in the way it's working. And again, there, having a clarity about the portfolio of initiatives that are really going to bring you towards your goals is something that can flow naturally and isn't a big additional feat of, oh no, next year we have again strategy period and we need 4 months where we cannot do anything else. That's not going to work. You're absolutely right. So ingrain it in the way you work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then we have the next question. How do you think the creative appetite is impacted by the shareholders? Creativity does mean taking risks, and often risky moves are penalized by the market.
So I think if I can go say a few words, Massimo.
Absolutely.
You talk about risks and managing risks of creativity, right? And I think you're spot on, right? And I think you're spot on when you talk about betting the company, right? Having initiatives or projects or creative ideas that you run in blindly, unaware of the uncertainties you're facing, and allocating way too much resources in comparison to the uncertainties you're facing, and in comparison how sure you are that this is going to work. So I think having a very balanced approach to managing risks in your creative and crazy business development ideas is key. And in the portfolio we have seen before, right? You have a horizon view, an uncertainty view. By being aware of that and managing it accordingly, only investing as much as the risk involved allows for, I think will allow you to move closer and manage risks and have it like under control, but still be creative and having a couple of crazy creative options ongoing without overloading and betting the company.
I totally agree with you, Samuel, on this part. And if I can add, it really comes from the top. It really comes from the board and the CEO. I've seen so many companies where they had a fantastic innovation team and strategy team that was very, very agile because the CEO was endorsing this. And as soon as the CEO left the company, those teams are usually the first one being wiped out. So it definitely needs to have the CEO and the board endorsement in this regard, which in the end will come from the mandate from the shareholders.
Okay, thank you so much. Then our next question is, do you have any data on which of your strategy approaches delivers the most motivation engagement among the workforce? Maybe Massimo, you want to start?
Yes, what I can add here is that what we spoke about before briefly in terms of buy-in, people needs to be involved in some ways in the strategy process in order to buy in and believe that that's the way things should be done. If people are not involved in the strategy process through various workshop or town hall or other type of hackathons, whatever you want to use, in the end though, everyone in the organization needs to be somewhat involved, not just because you never know who has the best idea for strategy, but also because if you're not part of the process, you just start to disconnected from it and you don't see how your daily action today have an impact for the company strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe also a few words on, I don't have various strategic approaches that I spoke about, so I can just relate to the strategic agility approach, right? But what I can say there, and we work with that at Analytical, right? There we really try to link it, and you have seen we have empowered teams. We try to really make it a thing of these teams that they actually are doing the strategy. They're strategizing through participation and through engagement in these strategic initiatives. So engagement there is really high, and we even go so far actually to tie incentive structures to everyone's contribution to these strategic initiatives, right? So it's not just a random thing happening in the ivory tower, as we heard. We actually make it everyone's problem or topic every day of the year. And actually in the end of the year, we get an evaluation. Okay, which are the initiatives that are closest to you that you can contribute to, and that's actually impacting bonus structures and so on. So here we have really made it everyone's task, and I've seen good results on that. Maybe there are better ways to do it, but I really like that engagement level that we could create there.
Thank you so much. Then our next question is directed for Samuel. So since strategy is where you put your resources, what's a good ratio to aim for between exploit and explore, especially in resources invested? So not an absolute number of initiatives. So for example, 80-20.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like how you were specific on not absolute number of initiatives, because that's what I would also have mentioned. Because you see in our portfolio, right, we have a good mix across the whole spectrum, right? But you're absolutely right. The resources invested are not just linear and just in all the places the same way. Because why? Because of the uncertainty faced, right? So in high uncertainty, we heard it before, not bet the company and just put all the money on one or two cards, just far out, very uncertain, then we don't have a clue how it will manifest. But we want to manage that actively. Now about your concrete question, a good ratio. I don't know, I once heard, I'm not sure if that's from Amazon but yeah, generally we take the rule of thumb, something around 70, 20, and 10 in these three horizons, right? We work with three horizons, everything managing the current business, making sure we stay afloat, and we're building the platforms for growth, is something around 60, 70%. 20 to 30% on really the things of tomorrow. And I think we probably allocate about 10% to this longer shots. You have seen the example of this new segment we want to get in, but the uncertainties that they are so high, we need to learn so much. It sticks to about 10%. So 60, 70, 20, 30, 10 in these three horizons. That's what we probably work with.
Okay, thank you. And then so far our last question. Can you share examples of the most mature organizations you've come across in terms of agile strategic planning and execution? So maybe Massimo, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start with this one. Samuel just mentioned Amazon, and Amazon has definitely some elements of agility in the way that they think about strategy and think about strategic planning. Other two companies that I've come across over the years that are well known to everyone and are particularly good at this are eBay and Southwest Airlines. In particular, eBay, there is some studies in which they talk about the fact that they don't do strategic planning at all. Their idea is that by the time that you start to implement even in 2 or 3, 4 months time, the world has gone so ahead in so many ways that the strategy becomes fundamentally irrelevant. So what they do is they constantly run experiments about every new feature, every new products, everything that they're doing. And so they can learn very quickly and adapt very quickly. So as they're another company that, being in a very difficult industry, the airline industry is not where you make a lot of money, they have decided to be more agile than on the planning side. And over the years, they had quite a lot of successes. Samuel.
Yeah, well, I'm less equipped with knowledge of how big corporations that everybody knows, how they work with. In the last almost 10 years, I've worked with like medium and larger corporations that are not that known, some hidden champions. There have come across quite a few that they're working very agile. And I think they learned over the last couple of years, in the last about 10 years, where we have started to implement that at many companies, this approach, strategic agility. So I have a few examples there, but yeah, we have a couple of case studies in the book about these companies. They're not known. They're in some very specific industry, but yeah, there are players out there that are not that known, that are a bit more in the background, are not huge, but they're pretty nifty, and they're on their way pretty well onto their ambitions with agile strategic ways of working.
Okay, thanks. And then we have a question for Massimo. Since you're in Australia, have you come across of Paul Colmsey and his colleague? I'm curious if anyone can really work it. If not, don't worry. A tangential question. Any example of visual strategizing, visual approaches to gaining alignment? I have some in my mind, but curious what you understand as the visual approaches to strategy and whether you have experience with it.
Thank you, Vladimir. I believe I come across some work on creativity by Paul, but to be honest, I'm not really familiar with the details of his work. The second question, I've seen a lot of consulting companies starting as boutique consulting and bringing in design into the way that they do their work, which is not necessarily the step-by-step journey mapping approach, but it's more a system design approach. And one thing that I've seen done particularly well is they're able to map in real time strategic conversations that happen in the room. And I thought those approaches are very, very effective because they build the strategy or an understanding of what the strategy could be for the company in a live session and share that directly with the people that participated, but also those visuals stays on the wall and they're always there as a reminder of what the priorities are or what are the principles of being agile for the organizations are. And I think nowadays most consulting companies would use some sort of those visual approaches in mapping strategic conversations.
Good.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you so much. So that was our last question. Now, yeah, we have some offers from your book. Maybe you quickly want to introduce your books.
Sure. Thank you, Caroline. Interesting thing, Samuel and I were connected by CEMS and connected through CEMS because of our roles. And in different point in times, we wrote two books that very much align with each other. In my case, I wrote the book also with another CEMS alumni, Philip Furyk, and a colleague. It's a very short book that has the aim to introduce people back to strategy. So I talk about behavioral strategy or some fundamental principle in strategies that are always long-lasting. And here's some small discount code for who is interested in reading a little bit more about how I think about strategy.
Yeah, and the other book is Strategic Agility. I've mentioned it a couple of times today. You have seen a few of the approaches of the portfolio, the initiatives. In the end, it's a very comprehensive book on the way we think, right? I wrote this book together with two colleagues at the consultancy company I worked before. The way we think, what is really the concept of the portfolio, the playing field, all of these things, the initiatives, how do you work with it? And really, how can you introduce it in your company? It's pretty hands-on, it's very practical. We have about 15 real case studies from our work, and there's a lot in it. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, get your copy. You can order it from anywhere in the world on the website, and you get 20% off over the next 48 hours with the code CEMS. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So a very warm thank you to you two for taking the time today and having this very interesting webinar with us today. Thank you so much. And also, I would like to remind to take part in the 2-minute survey after the webinar to give us feedback so we can improve for the next times. And also, I would like to mention that our next webinar is happening on June 10th, and it's about the remote onboarding experience. So how to build and participate in the right onboarding process, especially now during online working and working from home. Yeah, so also the alumni platform, if you're an alumni, if you haven't heard of that yet, you can register there and log in. And also, I would like to mention the CEMS podcast. If you haven't heard of it yet, feel free to check it out. Cool stuff going on there. Yes, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care. All right.